Hello, everyone. Welcome to The Gift, Growing in Faith Together, an ACYOA podcast put together by the Central Council of the Armenian Church Youth Organization of America. This podcast is here to answer your questions submitted by the young adults of the ACYOA, questions about our faith, God, and being Armenian American Christians. Each episode, we'll be chatting with and learning from clergy from the Armenian Church of the Eastern Diocese of America. I'm Mardi Klatchan.
And I'm Lucien Sabunjan, and we are the Ministries and Outreach Coordinators of the ACYOA Central Council. We're excited to host Ghevond Ajamian and Rith-Najarian on today's episode. Ghevond is pastor of St. Sarkis Armenian Church in Carrollton, Texas, and is a graduate of St. Narcissus Seminary. Ghevond grew up in New Jersey and is half Armenian, learning Armenian later in life. Ghevond is pastor of St. James Armenian Church in Richmond, Virginia. He's also a graduate of St. Narcissus Seminary, grew up in Minnesota, and is an avid fisherman. Before we dive into our topic today, we'd love to hear from you both on a moment from your past that inspired you and led you to the priesthood.
Thank you. Thank you, Magdik. It's a joy to be here with you today. Thinking about a moment in my life that led me to priesthood and the point where we are today, I can think back to a mentor of mine who was actually my first employer. I worked on a Christmas tree farm for 5 years in high school and my first year of college. And he was a very dedicated, devoted, faithful man. And so when we were out working in the farm, he would just ask me all kinds of questions and thoughts about the world, theological questions, what do you think? So that really got my mind contemplating those types of questions, so that when I went into college, I had an interest in taking theology courses. And even though I was a biology major, I always took theology courses as well because I had that interest instilled in me.
Nice.
Yes. So for me, when I was growing up, it sort of runs in the family. And participating in the church life. My mother's side was Roman Catholic, and so my uncle, and then on my father's side, my aunt, my uncle, and my cousin all went to seminary. So being involved in the church was very prominent in my life growing up, and really what really got me into the priesthood, I'd say, or interested is, or thinking about it even, was going to St. Narcissus summer conferences. When this high school summer conferences, that's what got me interested. And after that, that's where I ended up becoming a priest years later.
That's great. Thank you so much.
I agree with that as well. The St. Narcissus summer conferences really were the thing that connected me to this path. Before getting into seminary, having that opportunity to spend time with other Armenian youth.
Great. Thank you so much. And we really appreciate you taking the time to be with us today and answer questions submitted by Armenian youth from across our diocese.
Awesome. Thank you. So kind of leading into our first question, this individual asked, how can I better seek and discern God's will for me? Well, actually, it's a two-part question, but how can I better seek and discern God's will for me? And how can I overcome the feeling of having no purpose in my day-to-day life?
There's someone start.
This is a really good question because I think most people go through this at some point in life, and I don't know what's kind of preached in schools today, but I remember growing up hearing from teachers, you can be anything you want to be. And that just made it harder because, well, then I have to figure out, what this thing is. There's something out there that I need to want to be. And there's just endless possibilities. So it's a challenge to figure that out in this world. But I think for us as Armenian Christians, we have the blessing of knowing that God has a purpose for us. And that begins at our baptism, and even before that, from our very conception, we have a purpose in this world to be with God, for us to live in him and him to live in us through the church, and to be a part of that church. And what that means for each person takes some spiritual discernment and being connected to the church. So as St. Paul talks about in many of his epistles, being one body with many members. And so which member am I? What gifts has God given me for building up the church, for building others up in love? So I think, finding that purpose that God has for us requires looking at the gifts that we have. What am I particularly gifted in? Maybe I'm a particularly compassionate person and a good listener. So spending time with people who are lonely, lifting them up. Maybe I'm a good organizer. And so how can I use those organizational skills for building up the body of Christ? So I think each of us needs to look at, what we've been given from God, and through that discern what purpose he has for us.
Yeah. I like what you said earlier, and it's true, where all of us have a purpose in life. Everyone has a purpose, and God has created us for a specific reason, and that begins our personal ministries begin at baptism, each of us. I'd probably also say to this person, or whoever asked this question, that they need to be involved with God on a daily basis.
Mm-hmm.
It's not something where I go years without communicating with him, and now all of a sudden, all right, now I want to know, what am I supposed to do? And then go months and years again without doing that, without communicating with him again. So I guess questions would be, do you go to church? Do you read his word? Do you pray on a daily basis? Those are some of the big things. And it's not to say that you're bad, don't do these things. But we cannot expect that God is just going to tell us what to do or how to live our life without knowing or recognizing his voice. It's like nowadays, when we have our cell phones. In the olden days, when Deha and I were younger, we used to have phones that have caller ID. And that was a big deal if it had caller ID on it. That was a big, like, oh, we got a caller ID now. Now we can tell who's calling. But before, we had phones on the walls that you'd pick up. And you could recognize somebody's voice because you were in constant contact with them, right? You could tell, oh, it's mom calling, or it's my brother or sister calling. Nowadays, we see ahead of time because it tells us on our phones. But that's how we have to be with God, where when he calls us, we know who he is just by how he speaks to us, without having to question, oh, who is this? Who's calling? And it's usually not in a very boisterous voice. God speaks quietly. He's not one that's going to say all the time, you have to do it this way. Only a couple of times in the Gospels and in the Bible in general does he have a booming voice from heaven. Usually it's a quiet voice. It's also a voice that speaks with love. And I'd say it's also a voice that does not contradict what he said before. God is not a changing God. He's a constant God. So if we feel someone comes into that discernment, how do we discern, or how do we separate God's word or God's voice from the voices of the earth, from the world that's being telling us so many things to do? And we have to be able to discern those two. And so God's voice will not tell us, oh, you should do this, right? If God says, love everyone, and we hear a voice saying, oh, hate those people over there, that's probably not God's voice telling you what to do. That's someone else. But so his voice will not contradict. Or we really, 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 really want to do something that goes against God's word. And then we say, oh, I think God's telling me to do that. Chances are it's not God telling you to go against his word. It's something else trying to trick you into doing that. But being involved with God and being communicative with God on a daily basis helps us recognize who God is and what our purpose may be in this life. And sometimes God will tell us what to do in this life for him through other people, through clergymen, through people in the church, through the saints. People will be reading other people's words or contacting people, and they may give us, just like Ghevond said, as their Samuel said, he was working on a Christmas tree farm. And the gentleman there sort of steered him in a path towards religion, towards theology, towards God. So this idea that other people can help us find our purpose. God works through each of us, and we may be that to other people as well.
That's a good point. That I wanted to just add a little bit to what you said about listening to God's voice, because I think that's so important, because sometimes the purpose that we're being called to can be very unexpected. And we might not even see those gifts and qualities in ourselves that God sees, or others, as you said, who he speaks through. I think if you told me those years when I was working on that tree farm that one day I was going to be an Armenian priest, and serving, I would have thought you were crazy. It was not something that I saw coming, and I think if we look at the example of the apostles as well, how many of them were fishermen and tax collectors and people who were already doing something in their lives, and then were called to do something great in an unexpected way. So I think that's another thing to keep in mind, is that God's purpose for us might be unexpected to us.
Exactly. It might be unexpected, but it's not something, like you said. I think you said this also. It should not be something we dismiss, or we should just be like, oh no, that can't be. We might say, oh, that can't be me, but other people will see the qualities that are in us to do what God needs us to do. And like the apostles, they're fishermen, but Christ says, I'll make you fisher of men, right? And so yes, by ourselves, we can't do any of those things. It's impossible. But through God and him being with us, we can perform miracles and do great things in this world. But we know that we can do that only because he is with us.
I think it's a great reminder, especially for a lot of us who are young professionals and trying to find our way, whether it be in a career journey perspective, or, how we can just better the quality of our lives and the lives of others. It's not one or the other, but how all this is, works together in helping us find our purpose. So thank you both for those thoughtful answers.
I want to add one little thing that kind of touch up on what Ghevond said real fast. You said in the beginning, that continual pursuit, praying as much as you can, or going to church, or being around Christ-like-minded people. Somebody had asked me, what would happen if you only ate once a week? I'd probably starve the rest of the week. But they're like, so then why are you doing it spiritually? You go to church on Sunday, but you should still make a pursuit to go to church any other day of the week, or read the Bible, or go to Bible studies, So you should still continually spiritually feeding yourself. And so making it a habit not to just do it that one day. The more you do it, the more you're going to come to terms with that. Same way as going to the gym. So I like how you brought that up. And thank you for your answers. And actually, just a quick reminder, if you think of any additional questions for future episodes while listening to this episode, please submit them by clicking on the link in the description below. We'll have it there so you can add on to the questionnaire that we already have set up.
So our next question is, how can we find spiritual mentors among the old in our lives?
I'll take this one. Because even though I'm not the older one of the two of us, I can tell you how I find spiritual mentors. I would say spiritual mentors, especially in the elderly or in the older generation, can be found just like finding professional mentors. You have to look at their resumes. Where are they in life? What have they done? And you're not going to find the perfect mentor, neither spiritually nor professionally, because everyone is going to have imperfections. But I would suggest, at least what I do now, is some of the greatest mentors that I find are the church fathers, the desert fathers, the saints of the church, reading what they've read, what they've written, and how they have experienced life, because they have experienced the same emotions, the feelings, the relationships that we have today. They've also experienced, and sort of teach me how to approach life the way they did. They're full of wisdom. I mean, there's nothing new under the sun. The things that happened 1,500 years ago are still happening today, just different people. And so that's one way I do it. The other thing, I'm blessed as a pastor in a parish to visit elderly and listening to them, listen to their stories, many of them coming from communist countries, many of them coming from backgrounds that we Americans can't even fathom. We read them in the newspapers and things, but escaping genocide in Syria, or war in Lebanon, or communism in Armenia, and all of these things, we have no idea what that's like. And hearing what they've gone through and the faith they still have is amazing. One, I remember in our parish, when I first got here, there was a lady named Armenian Friends, and she was Romanian Armenian. She passed away many years ago. She was one of my first funerals that I did. But what was amazing about her was she got married in Romania to an Armenian, and it was during Soviet times. And they were only married for 6 months, or actually going before that. Her family came from Constantinople, and they lost everything during the genocide. So they fled to Romania. She ended up marrying someone there, an Armenian. They were only married for 6 months, and somebody told on him about something, and so he got sent off to Siberia, and she never saw him again. And so for 7 years she was in mourning, and finally she remarried a Romanian. When they left Romania, they came to America. They lost everything leaving Romania because the Soviet Union wouldn't let them take anything. They had to start from zero here. She had a child she had a child who ended up dying from cancer. Her second husband ended up dying. She ended up having nothing near the end. Only what she had was a little apartment and some things. And the fact that she could still give thanks to God and glorify God was amazing through all of that. And so finding mentors like that are very, very important. And trying to find people who still have the faith after so many difficulties is what gives faith to other people who are experiencing so many things that pale in comparison to what they've experienced. But it's something that gives you faith and spiritually enlightens and builds you up.
Great. Yeah. For those listening, where can we find some of the writings of our church fathers and the saints? Is there anywhere in particular that we can go to find those?
Yes. If you type in on Google search engine church fathers writings or church father sayings, you'll find many, many, many things. I'll find some, and I'm sure we can put them in the description below, so people can click on that as well.
That would be great. Thank you.
And just to add to Ghevond, I think having and building relationships with our elders is a way that we can find that mentorship, to have conversations with them and get to know them, so that we can ask those those questions. How people who have been through difficult times, how did your faith carry you through that time? What did you pray about? And what experiences have you had? How has God acted in your life? And hearing those stories and those experiences of people who have been through it before us can be a great way for us to develop and build our own faith and spirituality. I think just spending time and having conversations will both people in that will benefit.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think a lot of us are blessed to have many elders in our church communities that hopefully we can find the time and make the time to connect with them on these things. So I guess for both of you also, did you have a spiritual mentor growing up, or do you have a spiritual mentor now?
Yes. Growing up, I can't remember. I don't know if I can say I specifically had one.
Sure.
For many people that I would approach and speak with, I mean, my aunt is one that has helped me throughout my journey. So that's one. But mentioning, as you said, elderly in the parishes, it's I say this with love, but the elderly love to talk about themselves and the past, and they want people to listen to them. And I say that again with love. It's not that they just ramble on, but they really have lots of wisdom to give us if we're willing to listen. And usually the younger generation thinks they know more than the older generation, and they don't. The older generation has already lived the life we've lived, and they know all the things. So it's wise to listen to them. But for spiritual advisors or spiritual mentors, I'd say probably my aunt would be one.
How about you, Dersanville?
I've had different people at different points in my life that have served as mentors. I think going back to that one that I mentioned at the beginning of the podcast, my first employer, who really had a big point in leading me down the path that I've been on in my life. I ended up going to the Catholic university that he went to with all of the questions that I had. And when I was there, then, at the university that I was at, there was monks living on every floor of the residence hall, and many of those monks became, a part of my daily life during those years. And that led me, much closer to the church. The more I thought about those things and those questions, the more I was drawn in. And then certainly, reaching the point of being in seminary, you're surrounded by a lot of people who have that experience. And one of those people that I met in seminary is a priest in the Syriac church, one of our sister churches. And he has been and continues till today a spiritual mentor for me that I still call regularly. We don't live in the same state anymore, but I think at least once a month I give him a call just to go through all the things that I'm dealing with in my personal life, as a pastor. He's one who's served as a priest for so long in a very similar environment to ours, but has a little bit of distance from the Armenian Church, which has been a good thing.
Awesome. Thank you guys so much. Our next question is submitted by another ACYOA member. What are some ways to remember Christ and live a life filled with Christ among friends who are not religious at all? I find this much easier to do with my Armenian friends. It's a frequent challenge for me when spending time with my non-Armenian friends.
I'll go with this one in the beginning. I would say, if your friends are, so I've noticed, I think all Armenians are this way. You have two sets of friends. You have your Armenian friends, and then you have your American friends. And usually they don't interact. You try to keep them separate. Very rarely will you have one or two of them sort of interact. But it's always weird when that happens because you're thinking to yourself, okay, let's no one say anything weird because I don't want the other guys to know about this, whatever it may be. However, I also think for many Armenians, we're very proud of our heritage and our culture and our language and food and all of this stuff. We have no problem boasting about it with our non-Armenian friends. And they all know, oh, he or she is Armenian. Okay, yep, whatever. But they're wearing blue and orange and all this stuff, and they're all excited when they hear something about Armenia or they see an Armenian last name in the movie credits or whatever. But having said all that, what we've all live in today is regulate one section of our life, and then society or the we don't allow the two to come together. I think as an Armenian Christian with non-Armenian friends, naturally, one should try their best to let those friends know that they are Christian as well. It's not just being Armenian; it's being Christian too. The two go hand in hand. They're infused and they're intertwined together. Growing up, my friends always knew that on Saturday nights I could not stay out late because I had church the next morning. And they would naturally mock me and make fun of me and say, oh, you have to go to church, come on. And I would say, I have to go home, I have to shave, I have to get a good night's rest, I have to wake up early, all this stuff. And they'd always make fun of me for all this stuff. But it got to the point where they knew on a Saturday night, they'd be like, okay, he can't come out past 10:30 because he has to go home and get ready for church tomorrow. So it sort of influenced their decision making and what they were doing, and even conversations. When they knew I would be a little bit more religious, they would watch what they say and what we would talk about, because they would find it being either inappropriate or they'd feel not strange, but out of respect for me. And it's not just me, but just in general, when people feel spirituality, and I'm not saying that, but when people feel a spiritual atmosphere in the room, they change. They act a little bit differently. And as Christians, that's what we're called to do. This is why the purvad, the incense holder that we light incense in the church, it represents a person, a human. And when you walk into a room and you smell that incense, there's something different there. Likewise, we may not have to say, and people can sort of feel that when we're in the room, if we're connected with God, and we have that feeling in us that we're exuding from us. But I think first of all, going all the way back to the beginning, if you have friends that are trying to keep you away from God and put you in situations that are not good or inappropriate or sinful, you need to find new friends. Okay, you can't stick with people who are going to cause you to stay away from God. At the same time, though, you may be that word, you may be that person that brings God to them, and you may have to speak a little bit more about God with them. There was one preacher I once heard that said, you may be the only Bible that somebody reads. And so we need to be that Bible that people see us and read us and say, okay, maybe I can change. And they may come to you asking and saying, hey, I know you go to church and my grandma's dying or really sick. And you may be that connection and that link between that friend and God. And so that's what we have to try to be. It's definitely easier to do this with Armenians because they understand, oh, we have Fadarak tomorrow. Okay, we got to get ready. But our Americans, oh, I have to go to church for 2 hours. What's that about? In another language? Why would you do that? That makes no sense. And that's where we have to come and sort of explain what we're doing. And sometimes we have to say, you know what? Come and see church. I brought all of my friends to church once. My Japanese friend, my American friends, all of them. They stuck out like sore thumbs, but they came in and they finally understood what I was talking about all this.
The part that I would add on is I think that the two comments that the person asking the question made are really important about how they find it much easier to spend time with their Armenian friends, and that it's a challenge for them spending time with non-Armenian friends. And that challenge can be a very good thing because it can help us grow and understand our own thoughts and beliefs. And somebody who hasn't grown up in the Armenian church might ask us a question that we hadn't thought about before, and it can cause us to dig a little deeper and understand our own faith a little better. And likewise, it's an opportunity to challenge them as well, and to be a source of light in their lives. And so I like that it's a challenge, spending time and interaction with non-Armenian friends or non-religious friends. Having a friend who's an atheist is not a bad thing necessarily. We can have good conversations, challenge one another, ask those questions that we might not get from those who think in a very similar way or have similar experiences.
Yeah. Going off of that, I know I've spoken to a lot of people at retreats and other places where we want to discuss these topics, or we know we get put in situations where others, again, non-Christians, might ask us questions about our faith. Do you have any advice on how we can go about answering people's questions, whether it's on things we don't feel confident about, or how we can help them understand better if they have questions on our faith or about Christianity in general?
You're talking about non-Armenians?
Yeah.
Asking these questions?
Yes.
So the diocese has produced these nifty little booklets now, right? That are going to, like, this one says, Faith of the Armenian Church, an introduction, a brief introduction. So these can be found on the Vemkar website, which will be linked in the description below. And the diocese is producing these, asking priests and others to write these up so that they're printable, they're easy to use, they're easily navigate. You can navigate through them very, very confidently. And naturally, reading these will not make you a theologian and an expert, but will give you a foretaste of what it is. To go deeper into that, if there's any questions that people ask, though, that you may not have an answer to, my suggestion would be, don't try and answer it, because you're probably going to dig yourself into a deeper hole. It's easier to say, I don't know that answer, but I'm going to ask around and I'll come up with it. And priests do this too. If we don't have an answer to a question, we say, I don't know, but let me look it up and let me read the Bible a little bit more. Let me pray about it. Let me ask some questions to whether it be the bishop or more seasoned clergy, and I'll get back to you with the answer. The worst thing you can do is, in the heat of the moment, try and answer a question, and it'll be wrong. And then they may be trying to say, I gotcha, and trying to prove you wrong, or they may take what you say, go off with it, and really, well, because they aren't, it was the wrong answer. Read these books and then these little pamphlets that are on the Vemkar website, and also ask around. The more that you ask questions, the more you will learn about your faith. There's nothing wrong with asking questions.
Yeah, those seem like a great resource for both us to be able to read and learn, and then also share those with others for them to read and learn if they're interested in learning more.
Okay, awesome. I guess I can kind of lead on to the next, last question is also another two-parter. How can we find ways to worship daily? And what does it mean to worship? Yeah, how can we find ways to worship daily, and what does it mean to worship?
So worship if we go into, I like etymology. I like learning where the roots of words come from. And so the word worship comes from two old English words. The first one related to the word worth, right? Worth, worthy, honor, and then ship, like a quality or condition, right? Like friendship, companionship, worship, right? So worship literally means the quality of having worth, or the quality of being worthy or honored of something. So the question then becomes, what do we feel that our time or our energy is worthy of, right? So sometimes if we spend all of our time and energy on our iPhones, right, on our phones, with our friends, with work, with school, it can seem like we're worshiping these things. And if you think about the phone, you put the phone in front of you, sort of like an icon in front. And we even use these terms with computers and stuff, like the icons or the app icons, right? We put these things in front of us, and we end up starting to worship these things because we're saying that this thing is worthy of my time more than something else, right? Rather than studying, or rather than praying, studying our faith, helping others, we're busy scrolling through Instagram or TikTok or Snapchat or whatever else is out there now. I'm too old to even have most of these things. But what we need to do is really figure out what should have our attention first. What should be worthy of our attention? That should be worthy. That thing that is worthy of our attention is the thing we end up worshiping. And that really, the answer should be, if you don't know it already, is God. God is the thing that is worthy of our attention, that we should worship. And this means making a conscious and dedicated effort every day, as Marty, you mentioned earlier too, to do it every day, not regulated to 2 hours on a Sunday. And if we're honest with most Armenians come to church maybe once every couple of months for 10 minutes. Okay. Not every Sunday for 2 hours or an hour and a half, however long your church is. So making a conscious effort to do a daily prayer, readings, helping others, participating in fasting. Most Armenians don't do this. Even during Lent, we say we do, but it's usually, we try to cut all the corners and do other things,
And Ghevond, if I might jump in, as you said, the center of worship is always God. And that fasting is a way to that. It's a way of putting aside the other things in our lives to put God at the center, to make sure that he's that priority and that number one. So a lot of times there, it seems like how is fasting a part of worship? And it allows us to clear away those things that might be blurring our view or inhibiting us from drawing near to God, the one who draws all of us in together as the church. And I think that's one of the things that it's an easy trap to fall into, because outside the Armenian Church and a lot of non-traditional churches, there's an idea that worship is very much me-centered. I have to go and find the type of worship that suits me. Maybe I want to go and hear a specific type of music. I want to hear more modern music. So I'm going to go find a type of worship that fits what I want. And I think even as Armenians, we fall into this trap of thinking, what did I get out of worship? And when I go to liturgy, what have I didn't get anything out of it. And if we're looking to get something out of it for ourselves, then we're missing a big part of worship, which is God focused, and bringing our attention to God, bringing our praise, our thankfulness, our joy together in communion, and that center of our worship is always Badarak, that most intense way that we have that communion with God, that connection. And everything else that we do as worship flows from that, together as ourselves and together as the church, as the community.
You said it was right, because for American Armenians and Americans in general, and even Armenians, like you said, it's very me focused, right? We think worship has to come this way, right? We have to try and what do they call it? Church hop, or we'll go from church to church, trying to find the worship that I can connect with, or that makes me feel good, right? It's more coming towards us rather than going outwards. But true worship is an outward act. It's an action. It's not passive, it's active, right? The Armenian word that we usually use for worship, yegir bakel, to bow down, to worship. Yegir bakel literally means yegir, ground, and bakel, to kiss the ground. So it's an active movement. It's an active action. It's not something that we just sit there and let it happen to us, but we do it towards something else, which is God. And like you said, the center of our worship, the center of everything is the church, is the Badarak, is the Eucharist, the church that we need. Worship is important, and it's something that should be done every day. Now, doesn't mean, I can guarantee you, if you go to church and you start knocking on your church door every day, Dad is going to be a little bit upset that you keep on coming and wanting him to do Badarak every day. I can guarantee you that. But that doesn't mean that you can't do things at home that are like worship, Der Samo probably remembers, we had a professor in seminary, Father Paul Tarazi, Antiochian Orthodox Church, but at St. Vladimir's, when we went and studied at St. Vladimir's. And he said once, if you are on your way to church, to liturgy, right, to the Badarak, and you see someone with a flat tire on the side of the road, and you stop and help them with that flat tire and miss church, you've already participated in liturgy. You've already worshipped God, because you're helping someone else in a situation that needs it, right? God, Christ says, and he quotes the Old Testament, Hosea, I think, if I remember correctly, where he says, if you understood this, you would understand what I say when I want mercy, not sacrifice, right? Being willing to help someone else and not necessarily torture yourself or make a sacrifice for me, but doing it to help someone else. That's true liturgy. That's true worship. And that's something that we need to try and do more of. Because again, as Dehide said, it's so me focused. It has to be outward focused, not inward.
Thank you both for that, and for taking the time to be on our podcast today. I know Madig and I have learned a lot, and we are excited for everyone to listen in and have something to be able to take to challenge themselves and inspire them to learn more and to grow closer to God.
Thank you so much for having us. From the great state of Texas, I thank you. And I know that we won't be on the next podcast, because I think you're doing different clergy every time. Yeah. But I can't speak for Der Samuel, but I look forward to the next time. Hopefully I'm invited.
Likewise. Thank you, Marty. Thank you, Lucine, from the Commonwealth of Virginia. Thank you for having me. And we look forward to seeing where this podcast goes.
And ending with that, Lucine and I want to thank you all, our listeners, for joining us today. These podcasts are designed for anyone to listen in, learn, and be a part of the ministries of the ACYOA Central Council. We hope you learned something new when it comes to discerning God's will, finding spiritual mentors, being a light to your non-religious friends, and actively worshiping God daily. If you have any questions that you want to ask our clergy for a future episode, click on the link in the description. That'll take you straight to our podcast questionnaire form. And we hope to catch you on the next one.